Well, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. My name is Brenna Simmons St. Ange, for those of you I don't know. We partner with the Worth Chair in Sustainable Development at CU Denver School of Public Affairs to bring to you the Sustainability Series. And this has been a partnership since, gosh, I think 2009, right, Jennifer? Yes, 2009. And we are thrilled to continue working with them this year and into the foreseeable future to bring you events like this. And the theme for 2016 is our clean energy future now. Not tomorrow, not next year, not in 2020, but now. How do we actualize this for our state? It's the first Tuesday of every month, so please mark your calendars and come on back. We'd love to see you here. Events like this are free and open to the public, and we want to keep them that way. However, there is a big cost associated with that. And so we'd like to thank very, very deeply from the bottom of our hearts, Res Americas, who is a sponsor of this program track specifically. And actually their CEO, Mr. Glenn Davis, is on our panel. So thank you for being here tonight and thank you for the support of the Sustainability Series. Tonight, however, we gather to learn about energy jobs in Colorado. And as I was putting together this panel, I was really impressed with the variety of topics that we could cover. Clean energy jobs in the United States are among some of the fastest growing in all industries. Some studies estimate that in 2015, in the first quarter alone, there was 1.2 million clean energy jobs created in just one quarter of last year. Colorado, our beautiful state, gets about 60% of our energy from coal. So looking at those two facts, it makes me wonder, what are we doing in Colorado to bridge the gap between current energy jobs and the energy jobs of a clean energy future? Colorado does have an impressive and growing clean energy job workforce. So what are some of the hiring and recruitment practices in leading energy employers in the state? And what is the landscape of energy jobs in Colorado, both clean and traditional? How are companies in the renewable sector approaching their hiring strategies? And what are some of the trends they are seeing across our beautiful state? Lastly, what is the role of Colorado's government when it comes to jobs in the energy sector? So all of these topics and more we'll explore with our wonderful, dynamic, and diverse panel this evening. And I will let our moderator, Mr. Bob Keefe, introduce them shortly. Mr. Bob Keefe is the Executive Director of Environmental Entrepreneurs, and he joined the organization in 2011 as its Communications Director, after more than 20 years in business, technology, and political journalism. Environmental Entrepreneurs, or E2 as we call them here locally, is a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and professionals from every sector in the economy who advocate for smart policies that are good for the environment and good for the economy. We are thrilled to have them here tonight, and we're also happy to be collaborating with them, so thank you, Susan, very much for your help with the panel this evening. Before I hand the mic over to Bob, I just want to give a few outlines of what to expect for this evening. So Bob will introduce the panel. They'll moderate the first 30 minutes or so of discussion, and then we'll open it up to you for question and answer. Some of the feedback we've gotten is that our audience, you wonderful people, want more time to interact with the panel. So we did just that for you this evening, and we saved even more time for question and answer at the end. So please don't be shy and make sure to get those burning questions you want answered addressed. Thank you very much for your time, and without further ado, Mr. Bob Keefe!
So let's keep with the hand-raising action. This is a speaker trick if you don't know, to keep you guys awake. If we were in Catholic Church, we'd be standing up and kneeling, but who in here cares about the environment? Okay, all right. Who cares about the economy? There you go. So you're in the right place. I'm in the right place. You guys, I think, are in the right place. So as Brenda mentioned, my name again is Bob Keefe. I run Environmental Entrepreneurs, E2. We've been around for about 16 years and doing exactly what Brenda said. We advocate for policies that are good for the economy, good for the environment. And we've got about 900 or so members spread across 9 chapters stretching from New York and Boston to San Diego, including our great E2 Rockies chapter here, and some of our wonderful E2 members and chapter directors are here in town, some of them wearing flowery Hawaiian shirts. We're happy to see them and happy to see all you guys. And how about the Alliance Center, huh? those of you who haven't been here, this is a pretty cool space, isn't it? And I can totally vouch for this collaboration idea that John and others started, because I've been here since about 9 a.m. and I haven't left the building, but I had about 14 meetings today. So bear with me if I get a little tired. So we're here to talk about clean energy jobs. And let me just set the landscape just a little bit, if I could, because E2's been tracking clean energy jobs around the country now for about 4.5 years or so. And what we know is this: the states that have the best policies for clean energy naturally create the most clean energy jobs. Yes, it's places like California. Yes, it's places like Massachusetts and New York. But from our work over the years, Colorado has always been up there in the top 10 or so for the past several years in creating clean energy jobs, spinning off about several hundred jobs every quarter for the past several years. Now, Brenna talked a little bit about total clean energy jobs around the country. We just came out with a report about 3 months ago that we worked together with a bunch of other business groups as well as the Department of Energy to literally try to track every clean energy job in the country. And what we found is this: there are currently about 2.5 million people working in clean energy in America today. Now, we call clean energy renewables, we call it energy efficiency, we call it clean transportation, that folks that are building the Teslas and the batteries and the smart transmissions that go in the hybrids and everything else behind that. 2.5 million jobs, that's a hell of a lot of jobs. And it's, as Brenna mentioned, it's one of the fastest growing sectors of our economy. Now, as mentioned, of that 2.5 million, about 80% of those are energy efficiency jobs. These are jobs making lighting more efficient in places like this, making Energy Star appliances, doing upgrades to HVAC systems, which are in every building in this town and a lot of others. So the field is wide open, and to get a little bit more in depth with what's happening here in Colorado, we've got a great panel. We have, which is really cool because we have new energy, we have older energy, we have government, and and so these are the guys that are creating these jobs, whether it's at the state level in government or in the private industry. So I thought about reading these bios of everybody, but I know I would probably screw it up. So what I'm going to do is pass the mic and you guys introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what you do, and here's the clincher. Why do you do what you do? Starting with you, Jeff.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Ackerman. I direct the Colorado Energy Office, which is part of the Governor's Office. So first, to set that in context, and I'll speak more about that in a minute, that's the office that works on engaging markets across the spectrum, both from the production and the consumption, and looking at how we do market transformation. I come to that from a background working in a variety of places, whether it was in the Public Utilities Commission, whether it was with Public Service Company, when we used to call it Public Service Company, whether it's in the low-income space, working either as an advocate or a program operator there. Several different pieces I bring to that work right now. And I think why I do what I do now is in part because we're at a place in time where bringing those different pieces together is so critical. We're at a place where if we're going to make progress forward, those opportunities to have, like what my predecessor had, of an infusion of stimulus money from the federal government is not the thing we can wait around for. So knowing that there's progress we need to make, we're looking for where are the pressure points that can move forward an agenda in terms of how we transform markets, whether that's giving gentle affirmative nudges to Xcel Energy in the direction we'd like to see them evolve, whether it's how we want to see the transportation sector evolve, what we can continue doing in the building sector of what we've done there for decades. It's how do we find the pressure points in those markets to move them along. So a lot of that has to do with networking, collaboration, and liberal arts skills, which I pride myself in.
I'm Beth Brown. I used to work with Jeff at Xcel Energy. I've been with Xcel for 38 years, so I love what I do. I've done a variety of different jobs. Right now I'm in HR and I work in the inclusion engagement area. We have an opportunity, 50% of our workforce, including myself, will retire over the next 5 to 10 years. So my job right now is to work with Colorado School of Mines, CU Boulder, and other colleges to encourage the students to get into engineering, to get into the STEM field, so that when we retire, they can come and take over and have amazing talent at Excel. I'm working with high school students also to let them know that we're a really awesome company and that we may not be Google or Amazon, but we have a lot to offer. And I got to tell you, that's a challenge right now because a lot of parents want their kids to work at Google. And I'm here to tell them, like, hey, you can start out in the field for $21 an hour. You don't need a college degree to work at Excel. And then obviously our professional jobs. So I love what I do, and I think you can tell we're the facility that I'm in, we're platinum leads. We moved in there in 2010. We're the #1 wind provider in the United States. We're in the top 10 solar.
Hi, I'm Glenn Davis. I lead the Americas part of Renewable Energy Systems, or RES, which is a UK-based global company that develops and constructs renewable energy projects, principally wind and solar. We also do that with energy storage projects, principally battery technologies, and we're also in transmission. My wife Jill is sitting right here. She and I have 2 boys, 5 and 4. And one of their favorite songs is by Jeff and Paige, and it's called 21st Century Energy Superheroes. And I do what I do to be that guy.
Nice. I like that one.
And what I think I'll do and try and, in 10 minutes is give you a little bit of a sense from the government's point of view of how we look at the state of energy employment in Colorado. So first, there's an obligatory, it's not a disclaimer, it's who am I kind of thing. I'm not expecting you to read all that. I want you to get one takeaway from that. That what I said a minute ago is we work in markets. We work in trying to transform, to nudge markets in both production and consumption of energy. But the one thing I want you to think about here is that it's markets. And because tonight we're talking about labor as a market, really. And I would think you need to understand that. So by understanding labor as a market, you can understand what role the government can and cannot play in that market effectively. So with that, I thought it would be important to first put a little broader context. When you talk about energy in Colorado, you can't help, given our history, to talk about traditional energy. That's where it starts from. And so to realize we're a state that has a strong oil and gas and a strong coal background to who we are. But we're seeing very clearly the downward trends in employment in that space. That is a backdrop that influences this conversation about energy employment greatly, because you have to talk about the whole spectrum and talk about whether or not jobs are going to shift from one part of the energy spectrum or not, and that's well worth having some Q&A about. Then you look at the renewable side of things then, and that's where you're seeing that phenomenal growth, and this is Colorado-based numbers. We're seeing phenomenal growth in the wind, in solar, and then other, and we'll talk about what that other is. But that there is just, these are just fairly near-term trends, really tells you that we're in a space where that transition's happening fairly quickly, and then we'll get to sort of what does that mean, what's behind that first. But to just spend another couple minutes so you understand, in the oil and gas space, we're talking about rankings. We have, we're a strong state in terms of production of oil and gas, but at the same time, that downward trend is something that is very significant right now, and that trend in what's happening in the natural gas space and the oil space in particular speaks to the point of what is it that we can and cannot control. Trying to help move that market in whatever direction. That's being buffeted by very dynamic forces well beyond the state of Colorado's boundaries. We're talking about the price of oil across the world. We're talking about what's happening in natural gas in terms of what it's being used for, how it's being used in the electricity sector, how it's being developed, the new ways it's being brought out and the like. So big changes are affecting that. You go to the coal sector, our ranking not quite as strong, but it's important to realize why coal is a part of the background, the backbone of who we are as a state in terms of our ranking as a coal-producing state as well, and what that means to a state that not too long ago was producing at about 80% of our electricity was from coal. Now we're hovering in about the 60% range. And that reflects what's going on in terms of, although the employment numbers are down as well, it's that change from coal to natural gas as well as other electric generation sources. And then, and I asked my staff, do I really want to say it's due to federal regulations is what's affecting the coal market? That's an interesting point of contention as to who's affecting the coal market. You could spend a whole evening just on that, and there's some folks much smarter than I talking about what's going on in coal. Suffice to say, it's a product that has very few outlets, and as soon as those outlets are dampened in any way, then there's a decline, and from that decline, there's a trend, and you follow the capital. And the capital is really what's changing the coal market today. And we're watching that, whether or not we have a clean power plan come out of the Supreme Court or not, whether or not we see those regulations come forward. The trend is pretty clear where we're going, and it's having a real-world impact on local communities in Colorado already, and is a very important issue and a point of concern for the governor and the cabinet as to how do you respond to Delta County, how do you respond to the areas around Craig and the like, as to what to do in those spaces. Just to put it in very great detail, I picked this story up that came, I think, first out of High Country News and then picked up in the Durango Herald, just highlighting in about what's going on in the coal market and just zoning in, not to go into great detail, but to really show that this story is in front of us, and it's a compelling story as to what's happening, that both is in terms of, this is an industry, and I had the good fortune to take a tour down in one of the mines down around Somerset, and these are very sophisticated, high-paying jobs of folks making good living, doing very technical skills, and the transition out of that into where you take those skills is an interesting thing to reflect upon. But it's very much in the backdrop of our conversation. Now moving forward then to what we're talking about tonight in terms of, and again, terminology is important to us, but what we mean by clean energy or clean tech, one of the slides here coming from some of the different research being done in this space, we cover the gamut in terms of what you think about in clean energy generation, but you also think about what you heard Glenn and others talking about, whether it's the distribution system, whether it's storage, and then you work your way more upstream in terms of whether it's going on in laboratory and testing and the like, and then the programs behind that, including and then transportation, consulting, and then I'm not even sure if this even touches upon energy efficiency, a much more kind of difficult thing to put your hands around as a market, but I appreciate the work that's in that space. But that overlays in a profound way, as your data was showing, in terms of what is going on as you add efficiency to that. The point to bring home, though, is in that clean tech sector, what's going on in Colorado. So, in Colorado in 2015, watching an 8% increase in that market in terms of the data that's available, as opposed to across the United States, not quite a 5% increase. So there's something happening in Colorado. We're watching an aggregation, an amassing of what is known as clean tech or clean energy. It has a variety of reasons to that, and we can speak to that, whether it's the backbone of great labs and things that's come off the labs and the academic institutions that move into the market in the name of innovation and startup companies. But if you look at this over a phase of 2010 to 2015, 28.7% increase is sizable. Now, percentages are dangerous because a small number with a large percent still is a small number. But at the same time, it's a trend. You're seeing something fairly clear here, and you see a lot of different folks spend time ranking states against each other. I work for a governor who loves rankings, especially when we're in the top or the top three, and remind you when we're not, kind of thing. And so those rankings are very important to understanding how are we doing, because those rankings attract venture capital in a lot of ways. They attract confidence that something's happening. And there's something happening here, and folks like, I grabbed the front page of the magazine there that the Colorado Clean Tech Industries Association puts together. There's a lot of aggregation of effort here going on along that whole commercialization process of what you're seeing here, and that's something of great interest to the administration, understanding how do you create that atmosphere, that culture that says we foster innovation, we want to see these kind of startup companies, because that's a big part of, I think, although it's in small pieces, that's the nature of how we're moving forward in this sector, employment-wise. So, to touch upon a few of the areas, I think in wind, and this goes to having companies like this building that backbone. I was just chatting with Michael before we started. In a company like yours, Michael, that is doing the O&M, the operation and maintenance on wind facilities. There's a lot of that growth of this kind of market here in Colorado in terms of that type of new job coming in here, and Colorado being seen as a place, a lot of ways for indigenous wind production. We're not quite as well poised to export wind as some other states, but we have growing demand for electricity and the movement, and having, as you heard Bev talking about, of Xcel's move in its leadership in renewables, and wind in particular. There's a lot of backbone here in terms of employment. You look at what's happening there, Vestas is great to have in the background in terms of that work, and there's 3 different sites, whether it's Loveland, Brighton, or Pueblo, and the types of jobs they're bringing on. And you look at the steady development of a wind farm about NextEra, Black Hills moving into wind and trying their own project that they will work with the builder on and ultimately own. And then what Tri-State has done in this space at all as well. You see wind continuing to come along. It ebbs and flows with the growth of resource needs amongst those utilities and the others, but there's a backbone of wind clearly here. I think we have that in twice, so that's good. But then move to solar for a minute. Again, rankings. You got states like California that overshadow, and they have to change the graph sometimes to make the other states even be able to be on the same graph with California. But they're sort of a country unto themselves. But so Colorado keeps staying on about 10th place in this in terms of what's going on in the solar space. Interesting to figure out what that means to Colorado. Why is that? I get a lot of pushback from folks wanting to know why isn't Colorado in the top 3 or 4? What does that represent? And we're talking solar both from rooftop to community to utility scale solar there. It's another topic we can talk about as well. And then, but you look at what's happening in Colorado, I think the case in point, I helped our Office of Economic Development and International Trade do the recruiting when Sunrun out of California was saying where do they want to put more of their operations, in their back office operations, comparing us to other primarily Western states. And we were able to announce last December, Sunrun deciding to build about, bring their employees about 4 blocks from where we're sitting right now. And why they chose that is an interesting thing to look at both. What did they say about why they chose that? And they talked about the state's technology-focused workforce, clean energy industry, how residents are compensated for solar, that sort of code for net metering, and favorable political policy toward renewables, net metering and beyond. But basically saying there's something here in Colorado that can attract a business like that. That's important to us. That's important to the governor and to the administration to understand. We build off of that kind of messaging. At the same time, a less note in this conversation is look what kind of jobs this brought in. We're talking about project planning, design engineering, and customer care. Not the first things on your mind when you think about clean energy jobs, but those are in the mix, and those are critical to making the whole spectrum of clean energy viable and functional. So that's a big part of understanding what we mean when we talk about this economy and the types of jobs we're bringing forward. Furthermore, what else is going on in the market? So again, we see these are just data points of things you see happening out and about, whether it's that great project down there at Comanche, or what Platte River's doing with UE, or the project going on in Weld County. These are just data points that say the solar market is alive and well and moving forward in different size and configuration. Xcel making great strides in utility scale solar. Community scale solar is a big piece of the market and moving along. And then it's well worth talking a bit more about rooftop solar. And so our office decided rooftop solar is a hard thing actually in Colorado to put your hands around in terms of conclusive data. Everyone owns a little piece of the data, no one wants to share it. That's a different conversation we can have. But the point is that our best sense, looking at permitting and other material, tells us that there's about 30,000 dwellings, residences with customer-sited solar on them as of late last year. Probably a low estimate because still the data is hard to pull together. And the map on the left shows you sort of by dots where that, no surprise where that's happening. Probably not too much surprise. But the point is, that's a good toehold of a market that's in Colorado. Back to Sunrun's statements about what's going on in Colorado. That's a market we're trying to make sure persists in some substantial way. That as policies change, as utilities evolve, as we move forward with economics, that we still find that can be part of the mix. So, and with that comes employment of a variety of types of jobs that are in that, or as I mentioned, what Sunrun is talking about, and the growth you see. This is from hardly on the scale in the middle of the last decade to really showing up and showing strong growth throughout there now. Lastly, a couple last points to bring to your attention. Less well known, and what the Colorado Energy Office focuses more of its attention on. What are the other markets that we should be paying attention to? Wind and solar have their own momentum, and again, are markets that probably are more influenced by congressional policy, production and investment tax credits, than things we can do here at the state. But we're looking at the next markets, recycled energy, another code name for waste heat to power and the like. A very live topic in front of our Utility Commission and Xcel as we speak, looking at how to set the tariffs, how to size and bring that market to life so that folks who have excess heat or other energy on site can convert that into electricity as a new thing to tap. There's potential there as to what that means, both in terms of market development and labor development, whether that's project development, engineering, financing, accounting, and the regulatory side of that. Geothermal, it's a challenging piece to see how that'll be brought about. Generally, it'll be brought about in a multi-dimensional way, such as in Pagosa Springs, where they're looking at it both for a small amount of electric generation and what they can do with aquaculture and agriculture in terms of year-round heating of space and doing production there. So what that means to local community development, which drives a lot of labor, and what that means for bringing that on board. Small micro hydro is something we've had success in of working with farmers and ranchers to put on-site their own generation facilities in irrigation ditches and the like. Building off of that to pressure relief valve hydro that works off of municipal water systems that you can take the pressure on pipes, run that through a turbine, generate electricity. Again, each of these are areas where you're not going to see a big ballooning of employment, but opportunities as this whole spectrum grows out. I would say also what's not listed on there is the area of finance. It's probably a big area of growing potential in the whole space of clean energy, because finance will drive the future much more than grants or handouts. But that creative financing often is terms you don't always want to use together, depending on who you're talking to. But in that space, there's opportunity for those who understand finance and can package things together. It's a place we're looking as an office of how we can move residential commercial markets forward in that space. Lastly, it was talked about a little bit about STEM education. The Colorado Energy Office put a small amount of money through a third party to look at what is going on in STEM education, again, looking more upstream at the high school level. How do we encourage greater awareness of opportunities here while you've got young adults sort of just exploring, building knowledge to see where that knowledge turns into work and turns into careers. And so learned that by putting more STEM education in, you can spark interest in energy through STEM. That schools can connect. It's obviously a place to build a strong connection. We've got some great partners in the energy industry who want to support STEM development, so we're looking at those partnerships. And then you basically build off the backbone of existing curriculum and bring all of that together as a way to looking fairly, 10 years upstream as to how do you keep building that steady flow of new employees, especially when you heard about the grain of the utility sector. There's going to be a strong need for folks to keep moving in and find interest and passion in these spaces. So I think with that, that loops you around to where I'm at. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. And I really like that wind stat too, by the way. Quick question. Anybody know what the number 2 state in the country is for wind industry manufacturing? Anyone?
Iowa.
I don't really know the answer. I know what the number 1 state is for wind industry manufacturing, Colorado. You make more wind parts in this state than any other place in the country. And that supply chain for that wind industry snakes all across the country we did a study a couple of years ago actually about how far the wind industry supply chain goes, and if you add up all the way back to Canton, Ohio, where they make the ball bearings for those big nacelles and the fiberglass places where they make the blades and all of that, there's about 1,200 people that go into the manufacture of a typical wind farm, if you will, the equipment for a typical wind farm. But anyway, I digress. What we're really talking about here, Jeff, and it seems like, are you going to give me the hook? Oh, okay. It seems like what we're really talking about in a lot of ways is kind of the evolution of energy here in Colorado and here around the country. From just like the Navy went from wind to coal to nuclear to biofuel now, the energy industry is changing quite a bit as well, and that's what we're seeing play out in those numbers, I think. So Bev, this means something to the workforce, the energy workforce in a place like Colorado, and it means something to a company like Xcel. What are you guys doing to address this, and tell us a little bit about what Xcel's up to in this space?
Yeah, great question, Rob. So for one thing, as we talked about STEM, that is really, really important in this space. And between 2015 and 2010, 15% of the students that were getting an engineering major are no longer doing that. So there's a decline in students going to school and getting an engineering degree. That is a problem. So what we're trying to do is meet out with the high school students, with the counselors, with the teachers, with the parents, and explain to them how critical it is for our high school students to get into STEM education, to get an engineering degree, because we have a great opportunity to excel and the many jobs that will happen through this new energy future. Right now, I am meeting with all Denver public schools. We really want to bring in more diversity. We want to bring in more women. 22% of our workforce at Xcel are women. So we have a great opportunity there. I'm meeting with our distribution folks, our transmission, our power plant engineers and so forth, and they're saying that we're missing some things when it involves working with like Colorado School of Mines, CU Boulder, and the kind of curriculum that is being offered. So we are bringing in the Department of Engineer professors, we're bringing in NREL, we're bringing a lot of talent to say these are the kind of courses we would like to see offered at School of Mines because of this new thing called grid modernization. We don't have it figured out yet. We don't know what this looks like yet, but we know that we need more students taking more like power engineering courses and so forth. And we want to work together with the schools and with, like I said, NREL as an example. So I can't even get into the nuts and bolts of that. We've just had a couple meetings over the last couple months, but we realize that. And as everybody has said, we still have coal plants, and we are changing those over into natural gas. And so, for instance, up at 52nd and I-25 at Cherokee, we probably have about, and don't quote me on this, but about 250 employees up there. At that, when that gets converted, I think next year into natural gas, we will need 50 employees. But remember what I said at the beginning, 50% of our employees will be retiring over the next 5 years. So a lot of these things that we're doing, they're aligning up nicely, so we won't have people out of work, if you will. But we've got a challenge here, and we've got a lot of new things that we're tapping into, and we don't have all the solutions yet, but we're getting the right people at the table so that we can have some really good discussion and get the appropriate talent to be ready for this new energy future.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to talk here. This first slide is subtitled, "Enough About Me, What Do You Guys Think of Me?" Brenda asked me to put up a little bit about my personal history and how, professional history, and how I ended up running the Americas part of RES. I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide. I will, though, point out the Colorado connections, which starts in 1983 there. That was a summer job I had while I was at Brown studying energy conversion as a mechanical engineer. And that was to be part of a line of college students that went out to, basically did a pilgrimage to build the original office for the Rocky Mountain Institute out in Old Snowmass near Aspen for Amory and Hunter Lovins. So I connected with the Lovins. At that point, after 1983, I sort of lost track of them, but through the alliance, I reconnected with Hunter late last year, which was pretty amazing. In any event, Rocky Mountain Institute, as you know, is now based in Boulder. Amory lives in the house that we built for him, and if you ever get a chance to go see it, it's pretty remarkable. It's one of the first real passive solar high efficiency houses ever built. And I think they thought they were saving money by hiring college students and not paying them anything but feeding them. Little did they know how much we ate. The other then connection, fast forward to 2013, after living in San Francisco and spending part of that time working for AES, which I did for 18 years, and then starting a company called Agile Energy. We brought Agile Energy inside Res Americas, which brought us here to Colorado just about 3 years ago. And I became CEO of Res Americas in 2014, and that's been fantastic. So enough of that. Let's talk a little bit about how Res is structured. This is a very simplified organization chart at the global level. What you'll see in that blue box is the McAlpine family. Res, believe it or not, as large as we are, as much as we've accomplished, and on that point, we have built about 10% through our construction arm of the operating wind capacity in the United States. That's a significant contribution to the clean energy economy that we've made. But we are still a family-owned business, believe it or not. We are coming up on the 5th generation of McAlpines, not owning Res so much, but if you see the orange box, the SRM, which stands for Sir Robert McAlpine, construction business began in the mid-1800s by the patriarch of the McAlpine family. The people who are now running the family holding company, if you will, which includes Res, which includes SRM Constructors, is the 5th generation of businesses. There's some statistics that say family businesses that survive to the 5th generation is about 3% of all family businesses. So it's a pretty remarkable thing. And it does give us the ability, therefore, to have a long-term view on things, which is really important in an industry that has as many cycles and as many challenges. You know, notwithstanding all the positive statistics that are being discussed here and that are true, it is still a business that is subject to many cycles, and we can talk about why a little bit later. So Renewable Energy Systems itself is headquartered outside of London, and then we are broken up really into three major divisions. There's an EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Asia, part of the business, and these are the countries we're active in. In the Americas part of the business, we're active in US, Canada, and Chile. That's the part of the business that I lead. And then we have a global support function as well. Global support is largely based in the UK as well. And then within the Americas, we are organized around these divisions, and there are people that lead in each of those lighter green boxes: development, operations, strategy, etc. So this is my executive team, if you will. And we have development, we develop wind and solar projects. We have storage under strategy. It's a little bit of a misnomer. You know, storage, we do develop storage projects, so there's sort of a natural logic to it being under development, but it's so new and there are so many different features of it that at this stage of the game we are treating it as sort of a standalone piece of the company that interacts with the other pieces, but we have leadership that thinks specifically about storage as opposed to development generally. As you can see in the first two boxes, you know, we are in the Americas roughly 50% development, 50% construction. That's by a number of measures, by revenue, by profit, by number of people. Actually, I shouldn't say number of people because the construction part of the business has a lot more people building these projects than we have developing them. But as sort of drivers of the business, the way we think about our management time, et cetera, it is equal parts development and operations. And that's pretty unique in the space. There are some solar companies, First Solar and SunPower, that also have development and construction. They typically have the third leg of that, which is to deliver the solar modules. Within the wind space, it is fairly unique. There's some other companies that have some construction management along with them, but not looking at it as 50-50 the way we do. You know, we don't just construct projects that RES develops, we also construct on behalf of others who are developing their projects. So what do we look for in candidates? You know, we think about talent within the business in three different categories. And we like to emphasize to people that these are not in any particular hierarchy or order. That, you know, in the abstract, the business world tends to value this in reverse order that I have them listed. In other words, business leaders tend to be valued more highly than functional leaders, and more highly together than specialists. But we really go to great lengths to encourage people who are naturally inclined to be specialists. In other words, an engineer who designs solar projects or comes up with ways to, you know, even on the accounting side, to come up with new ways that we handle our money, etc., with no particular aspirations to run a department, which is sort of functional leader, or run the business, which is business leader. We tend to try, at least, to give those people the same support, the same encouragement to focus on what motivates them and to value it as highly as these other pieces. So if you're thinking about how to present yourself to RES as a potential candidate, bear this in mind. It isn't to say that you can come in and say, well, I'll just add value without being specific about it, but it is okay to characterize yourself in one of these categories, or more than one, you know, because people do grow from one to the other. Other characteristics, other qualities that we look for, obviously experience. There are, unfortunately, not that many entry-level jobs that RES provides, even to recent college graduates, even to recent business school graduates or other graduate school people. Now, that's not to say there are none, but it is practice at RES really to look at people's experience as the hook to bring them in. Character, maybe I should have listed this one first. RES is a very values-based company. We value culture very highly. The way you interact with your colleagues, the way you think about teamwork, the way you think about the good that we do while we do well is really important, and we decide whether to bring people in or not based on that. What your vision is, how do you see the company going, how do you have, what's your personal, professional vision, those sorts of things matter. And as with every company, communication and interpersonal skills are paramount. You know, we are, as you saw in the prior slide, at many points along the value chain. And what that means is cooperation, both within the specific areas that we're doing something like developing a project or constructing a project, is paramount, that cooperation. But also the ability to work with people that are doing something different than you are within the organization. If you're a developer, you've got to work with people who are constructing the project or engineering the project, or people that are in legal or other things. So that kind of ability to work with your colleagues is paramount. We do struggle with silos. Any company that has these different points along the value chain will have difficulty making or encouraging people to work across those points on the value chain, and we struggle with that as well. So it's important when you come to RES that you demonstrate that you can help us solve that problem. And then, as you can tell, you know, we are a developer, you're a constructor. That involves both white-collar and blue-collar jobs. And again, we value those equally. Where are we going in terms of hiring? So Broomfield office is our headquarters within the Americas. We've got about 230, 240 people there right now. We've also got satellite offices, Minneapolis, Austin, San Francisco, Montreal, and Santiago, developing projects in those various regions. All told, that's about 300 people. Now, I put the second bullet, the bottom sub-bullet, focused on improving efficiency because, you know, it is, and I'll get to this in the next slide, notwithstanding the growth in the market overall, it is also increasingly competitive in the market. And the market for renewable energy is maturing. And all of those factors lead to extensive pressure on us and our competitors to operate more efficiently. And as you can imagine, that has an impact on our hiring trends. So right now, you know, the word stable is the key. We're stable around 300. We're really not bringing that many new people into Broomfield at this point in time. You know, nonetheless, there is always turnover. Construction is much more cyclical. We have about 550 people right now, but we are in a bit of a trough in terms of our construction activity. As we peak in that, and there's some signs that we're heading back to a peak, that number will climb up to about 1,000. Those people are spread across North America, including Canada, just depending on where job sites are. I put a note in here about Europe. Europe is actually experiencing some extreme downward pressure in terms of the health of these renewable energy development and construction companies. And the primary reason for that is Europe has operated largely with extensive support from the government in terms of the tariffs, what the government, what the utilities will pay for renewable energy. It's come in the form of what they call feed-in tariffs. The government basically sets a price. If you meet the qualifications, you get that price. There's not a competitive aspect to selling renewable energy. That is all changing. The European Union is putting extensive pressure on all of its members to forego the feed-in tariff model and move to a more competitive model, looking a lot more like we do in the U.S. But it's a shock to the system in Europe, and there is extreme downward pressure on companies. So RES is no exception to that. I'll end with just this slide about sort of the various forces that are acting on clean energy. And as I said, there's a lot of positives to it, and you heard some of that earlier. There are also some forces pushing against clean energy. And then there's this perilous middle ground, which of course the first bullet there is what's going to happen in an election. All right. Any hands? Anybody want to go in on that one?
There's an election?
Yeah. I won't go through all of these. You know, on the top of it, most of you know Congress acted responsibly and extended the tax credits for both solar and wind and other renewable technologies last year, so that's a positive. The Paris Agreement, the Clean Power Plan, all are pushing in that direction. That leads to coal and nuclear plant retirements, which are happening actually independent of policy. There's a lot of economic drivers to those retirements. Nobody's talked about nuclear yet. We talk about clean energy, and I'm wondering where people are on this question. Is nuclear clean energy or not? But a whole other topic. Corporate commitments, right? So more and more companies are saying we want to be 100% carbon neutral, we want to do 100% renewable energy for our needs, et cetera. That is an increasing driver to the positive. Electric vehicles, everyone knows that story at the moment. Renewable energy is cheaper, significantly cheaper, and that is really, at the end of the day, that's going to be the thing that pushes it over the line. Policy is always going to be important, but if you can't make the economics work, it's just not going to happen. And then energy storage is important because renewable energy is, for the most part, intermittent, and making it work within the grid that needs to stay reliable is important. So as energy storage advances, both in terms of technology and economics, it will be another facilitator for continued growth in clean energy. I might do it on time. It's my last slide. I'm good. Okay. So let me talk about this middle section because I think there's some interesting things here. The election, you're not going to hear anything from me that you don't already know, but it is, in the context of renewable energy, as polar as we've ever seen. I mean, people were worried about Mitt Romney. We're in a whole other category. Especially, you may have heard today's comments about wind killing all the birds, blah, blah, blah. I'm on the board of the American Wind Energy Association. We had a board call today, just coincidentally, and we were talking about Trump's statements. And we, as the American Wind Energy Association, as you can imagine, are pushing really hard back. But we're trying to do it in a cooperative way because, God forbid, right? We got to deal with it. So it's a very interesting dynamic. Portfolio standards, renewable portfolios, RPS in the lingo, those are state by state, and they have actually been as much of a driver for what in the early days, even up through today, of renewable energy moving from barely on the radar to being a real force to be reckoned with. This is each state dictating by law the amount of renewable energy that needs to be purchased by the utilities, and that has been a big driver. Now, some states, New York just announced, are increasing the renewable energy standards. Other states have been moving backwards. So this is in the question mark area, not clear how much this is going to help or hurt going forward. And then unforeseen prices, this is a whole long discussion. People don't really talk about it very much, but if you think backwards, what really drives some of these seminal changes that happen? A lot of it is crisis, But what kind of crisis happened? I mean, if Greenland melts, if there is real effect, tangible effect of climate change, that will change what lawmakers do. It'll just change what people do. If you have some sort of crisis in people's face, it'll change what people do. On the other hand, if you have a war, if you have, really World War III, which it'll change people the other way. That's what people focus on. People won't worry about energy. They'll worry about all the things associated with war. So these are important, but people talk about it because you don't know what it's going to be. And if you start pretending like you know, you're going to sound stupid. But it can really change the way things go in either direction. And then I got a list of things that push in the other direction. I mentioned the maturing market, the increasing competitiveness of our space. It really matters. What we see when we go and try to sign a power purchase agreement with the customers are much smarter. They leverage the competition amongst all of us who want to sign a power purchase agreement to sell power from one of our projects. And they know what to ask for, they know how to work the process. Same on the construction side. And it just drives down margins. And that cascades down. It puts a lot of pressure on our business, and we are responding accordingly. Low oil and gas prices, this is likely to stay. They're not as low as they've been, but it's still at a point where you're not seeing what you saw in the 2008 timeframe when gas prices were extremely high and all sorts of money was going into renewable energy. So that dynamic matters. Load growth is pretty steady. Energy efficiency, although it's great, puts challenge on people who want to build new projects. Grid stability, transmission, again, this is related to a number of things, intermittency of renewable energy system. Net metering, there was a reference earlier, I won't go into the details of that, but the net metering policies are important, particularly for rooftop residential solar, and as those go, so too will residential solar for a while at least. And then I mentioned in Europe what's happening. So with that, thanks very much.
Thank you, John. All right, this is the time where you guys start thinking about your questions for this great panel. If you haven't figure them out already. I do have one quick question, Glenn, about wind particularly. So I've heard that wind and actually solar as well are big employers of veterans, mainly because these are people that aren't scared about scrambling around on roofs or climbing up those big old towers. Is that true, or is that a old wives' tale?
Can I speak without a mic, or should I?
No, you can.
It's in the...
Oh, thanks.
Well, wind and solar and energy in general, whether it's renewable or not, really does value what veterans can bring to the workforce. Absolutely, and just from a straight business perspective, notwithstanding, our responsibility as citizens to support veterans, which is also in the mix.
Yeah.
But even just as business people, when you're looking out there and trying to figure out who's going to do the job in the way that we need it done, veterans rise pretty high on the list really quickly. It's not to say that non-veterans also can't get up there and mix it up and do the things that are a little bit scary in our business. But veterans, for a lot of reasons beyond that, are excellent contributors to the workforce.
You got something to add to that, Bill?
Yes.
All right. Okay, Bill.
Okay, I'm a proud mother of a son who's in the Air Force, and he flies planes, and he went to the Air Force Academy. But our CEO is so passionate around us bringing in veterans. Last year we kicked butt, and instead of 10%, we hired 12% of our new hires were vets. And I actually have a reserve and guard person in my recruiting group that creates our veteran strategy and our diversity strategy, and she just is doing phenomenal. We have a lot of connections out there. What veterans bring is a great work ethic. They have such great experience in the military, great leadership. Like my son has 300 people reporting to him, and he's 32 years old and is responsible for our $1 million plane. It's incredible what they do, and they're not like scared, and they're very confident. So we're very proud at Excel and we've gotten many awards over the last several years around our friendly employer and all the things that we do for vets.
Great, thanks. All right, questions? Yes, sir.
First question, Mr. John Bowers.
I went to a breakfast this morning, Vets for Energy, VETS for Energy, and it was about jobs in the oil and gas industry. I use that as a platform on which to say, going to the renewable portfolio standard, the jobs that might be created. And I'll postulate that jobs in the oil and gas industry are truncated. They're going to fade away, we hope. And that jobs in wind, etc. So I'm curious, would Excel support an increase in the renewable portfolio standard in Colorado? And if so, what would the rest of you all and the rest of us out here do to help achieve that higher renewable portfolio standard? Glenn represents an active industry. Jeff, government. Bob, you represent nonprofit, bringing together businesses. So what could all of us do to support the achievement of a renewable portfolio standard that would have Excel be enthusiastically supporting it as opposed to being concerned by it?
Well, I think we're just doing it. Like, we are told...
What level could we tolerate? Could we go to
Okay.
60%?
It's not a fair question for me because I don't have that background. I'm in HR, I hire people.
I'm not going to speak on behalf of Excel, but I will, and of course, Res, just make it 100%, be Hawaii, right? But, the observation about Excel is that Excel isn't constrained by the RPS. Excel, this is, and Excel is, full disclosure, Excel is a big client of ours. We built 2 wind farms for them in North Dakota and Minnesota, and we're trying to do more business with them in Colorado. You saw that we're building Comanche, which is selling power to Excel. So, it's not an arm's length relationship necessarily, but Excel, for anyone who's watching what they're doing with respect to renewable energy. For example, the Comanche project is a solar project, 126 megawatts AC, that got its power purchase agreement through an all-source solicitation, and the gravity of that is really important. This means that Excel went out and said, no matter what kind of technology, what kind of fuel is powering your project, you can bid, and we're just going to compare them on equal terms. And lo and behold, after all this talk about high-cost solar, solar won. It was a big, big milestone in the business. And so Xcel signed the, they could have signed with a gas project, they could have signed with anything. They signed it with a solar project. Now, similarly, you know, they've got a project that's going to go in front of the PUC later this year. It's called the Rush Creek Project, 600 megawatts of wind. That's not motivated by an RPS. So it's happening for its own reasons. Now, you know, from Rez's perspective, I'm not arguing against RPS, but we are definitely prepared to move forward and grow in a world that really is not so much driven by RPS.
So I think it's a little more convenient to put the governor's office on the hot seat on this one. And so for those of you who I think most of you probably know this, but Colorado was the first state in the country to pass a renewable standard, a voter passed renewable standard. Well, and it's what, 30% now, is that right? 30%. So since then, California passed up a couple of years, or last year with 50%. Yesterday, New York with 50%. What's Colorado going to do to catch up, and is it needed? In those rankings, Jeff, that's your flashlight. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's a great question, and I think there's. I think if you look at what's going on in Colorado and what Glenn was speaking to, and it's great to see that push, whether it's you know, from the West Coast or the East Coast, you're seeing great push there. I think what will move to John, to your question about whether it's 50, 60%, because Colorado's public service is going to blow right past the 30% requirement. There's no concern about that. They're ready to move on. I think, and they're seeing the economics make sense of that. I think the way you move this forward right now is not necessarily, and this is a big part of what makes Colorado Colorado. If we were to come out right now and say, okay, 30 is great, let's go for 50, we would get one, possibly a couple of the other utilities do it great, and I'd have all hell break loose on the others. And is that worth it? To have part of the state go forward while the others are shooting at you at the same time, thus neutralizing your efforts. So you have to watch that dynamic all the time. That was my welcome gift to the job in 2013, was Senate Bill 252, saying, guess what, we're going to move forward with the non-investor-owned and move them forward. And watching the behavioral aspects of that conversation are not something you want to just set aside. That's important because watching Tri-State, and I don't think they would object to me saying this, they went backwards in their desire to do renewables to meet the old standards as we pushed them to go to new standards before we finally got them now to do carousel project and the like. They're moving forward. So my answer to whether it's 50 or 60, I think we'll see 50, 60, possibly to 80, but what will happen is it'll be non-linear. We need to see a change in how the system operates. We're going to need to see a system that knows how to use renewables more effectively, including what's coming on with distributed management type of things. How are we going to do load management in much more creative ways? And that's the new area of technology. That's the engineers. It's going to be the computer and electrical engineers that are going to get buildings to interact differently with the grid and going to get probably in some ways skipping past the human side of this. Because if we wait for enough people in homes and buildings and offices to make the right decision to get the system to work, we'll be waiting a little too long, unfortunately. Human behavior doesn't work. But you can get automation and you can get technology to move us forward, and it'll be ready to build a grid that'll easily accept 50, 60, 80% renewables as the system needs new generation. I think you can see renewables will fill that in. The Rush Creek project is a great example of that. Xcel's ready to go. And just one more comment as I'm getting myself in trouble with Tri-State, I'll just add that, you know, in Tri-State situation, the economics still are such that Tri-State and its 28 Colorado members or whatever they have, and its 44 members, it comes down to load growth. If you're a utility system that has load growth, it's a lot, you know, Xcel is blessed with load growth, for better or for worse. And so when you're talking about new generation, you're talking about what to bring on supplemental to what you have. If you're talking about what to bring on and what you get rid of, it's a double cost. And so that's what really confounds Tri-State in some ways. It's not just, should I bring on wind, but should I bring on wind and how fast do I retire my coal? So we're going to have to figure out a policy position going forward. And we, as the global we, to figure out how do you help an entity like Tri-State survive the accelerated retirement of their coal assets. Once you do that, sky's the limit on bringing renewables on. And you don't need a new RPS. You need to get through the gauntlet there.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, from the field. How about let's go from Jeff to Jeff.
So So on their website, Mid-American Energy has claimed that it's made a purchase that will bring it to 85% wind. And that's by 2019, 2020, as far as I can tell. Do you know how they're doing that?
Do I? It's Warren Buffett, he's amazing.
How's that working?
Iowa.
Yeah,
It's Iowa. Well, they are doing
A lot of it's in Iowa.
I used to live there.
yeah. I don't know the particulars of how Mid-America and Iowa, but you're right, Iowa is just going as a wonderful state. You wouldn't expect Iowa to be the place that you would watch this growth like this. Iowa is also the new home of all sorts of, what's the term for data management centers and the like. That Iowa, pardon?
SCADA?
Yeah, are just, and they're coming and saying, we're looking for clean energy to support these facilities. So I think what they're showing, and on NREL, as was mentioned earlier, NREL has done some great background research that says there is, 80% renewables is not unachievable. It's how you operate the system, it's how you control load, and how you integrate all those resources. And so I imagine that's what they're moving toward, is seeing that there's that. And again, back to my earlier point, is they're talking about new growth. And it's a lot easier to invest in clean resources when it's new growth, building on your base, and then you, on your own terms and own time, retire out the old stuff, versus just sort of shuttering it down and building all new, because it compounds the cost of it. I don't know if you have other thoughts on that or not.
Right. And that actually is an interesting aspect of this, is the economic development tool, right? Because as you mentioned, Facebook and Microsoft and others are going to places like Iowa and North Carolina because they want to go 100% renewables in their big data centers. That's a real opportunity, I think, in Colorado as well. Yes, ma'am. Lisa?
Couple questions, and also a clarification really fast. I'm understanding that hydro is not considered renewable in Colorado?
Under the renewable energy standard, existing hydro is not considered renewable. And you're not going to see, I don't know if it's prohibited or just the reality is you're not going to see anything in the way of large-scale new hydro just because of what it takes to permit and bring that along. Small hydro, it can, like we're doing, which is basically, as I mentioned before, can fit in as part of the compliance requirement.
Two questions. What is the difference in the economic and environmental footprints for a 50 megawatt wind versus a 30 megawatt solar project? And number two, are there actions that companies like Xcel and Tri-State can take to train employees currently working at coal facilities to be retired to work in the renewables market? I know Jeff mentioned Delta County. I worked for Tri-State for 8 years, by the way, so I know a lot of the people in Delta County. I know the economy of Delta County would have a serious hit if those facilities were retired. So how can we, and are we, from Xcel's perspective, are there programs that we can institute to train these people and keep them in a job rather than just laying them off and giving their job to a new high school recruit?
So specifically, as I mentioned earlier, like Cherokee, we're going from coal to natural gas, right? But those people are retiring. So by the time that we go with natural gas, we're going to be okay. But in small areas where we would need to retrain, we're actually putting some new product through technology initiatives together, where we're trying to train even our linemen and others that we're still going to need out in the field to use iPads and different kind of technology. So the simple answer is yes, but I'm sure Glenn can talk more about if some of these actually want to transfer out of Xcel and do some of this fun, sexy stuff that we don't do.
I do the sexy stuff. Right, honey?
I think it's a song coming.
Yeah, we've actually had some recent conversations on this exact topic, and we're just scratching the surface with respect to whether people who are being affected negatively by the movement away from coal, and miners in particular, but up and down the value chain, can then find homes and jobs within what we're doing. Now we're at the tail end of building Comanche, so this is in the Colorado context, but the tail end of building Comanche, and these projects are lumpy. You get them, and we're in competition for the next set of projects. So, we have a North American footprint, so we're active all over the place. But to the extent that we get the next set of construction work in Colorado, we very much will be looking at what you described as a place where we might find some very, very talented people that can over. Now, the downside of it is construction jobs only last so long, whereas a mine is there for a long time until big event. So it's a temporary landing, if you will, but it's an opportunity for people to get retrained. So, with respect to your first question, that's a long conversation, right? Especially if you look upstream in wind and upstream in solar and then downstream, you've got chemicals going into solar panels. What's the environmental footprint of that? Without going into all of that, the one thing that I'll just mention 2 points. From a land use perspective, solar consumes the land, right? You put panels out on a farm, you're not growing anything, right? Whereas wind, you've got a foundation, you're taking a little bit of land, but you've got basically vertical build as opposed to horizontal build, so you can continue to farm or graze cattle or what have you. So from a land perspective, wind is probably favorable over solar. On the other hand, wind has a visual aspect that solar doesn't have, and then the avian issue is, of course, there, which we're actually active in bringing to market a technology that actually spots through cameras eagles, bald eagles and golden eagles, and will allow curtailment of particular wind turbines on the farm to protect those eagles when they get closer. So it's a technology called Identiflight. We're rolling it out now. It's under license from Boulder Imaging out of Boulder. So there are things happening to address the avian issue, and we are very much part of that. So solar doesn't have that as much, unless you're talking about the power towers. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the towers fry the birds.
We need some of that technology for cats.
Yeah, well, the cat, I understand your question.
Brenda, how much time do we have time for one more?
Yeah, we have time for
Okay, one more. 2 more. All right, you guys are lucky. Yes, sir.
Thanks to all the panelists today. I think this is an awesome event. It's the first one I've been to, so this doesn't seem to be on, but...
Next time, you'll get a mic that works.
Okay.
Come back again.
There you go, Ian. Try it again.
Hello? All right. Sorry about that. That'll be part of the feedback. So this question was targeted at Glenn, but any of you guys can jump in if you have some perspective. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges in storage right now that need solving? Because obviously that'll be an important part, of bringing renewables on the grid going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge is regulatory. Obviously there's an economic part of it, and the economics need to work, but I would argue that if the value to the grid that energy storage projects bring was properly valued within the regulatory context, then the economics would be there. And it's a difficult, it's easy to say, it's a difficult proposition, because what batteries bring is value in sort of a dozen different ways that help the grid stay stable, that help integrate renewables, that have an economic, what they call arbitrage factor between high peak pricing and low peak pricing, and then you can sort of capture the difference of those through the batteries. There's a list of about a dozen different things, and if you put a battery on the system and try to get paid for bringing that value to the system, the rules of the system don't really allow it. There are exceptions to that. There's a service called frequency regulation, which basically keeps the system running at 60 hertz that batteries can help bring. And there are pockets within the United States, in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, PJM, for those that know, where there's an actual market set up to sell that service and get compensated fairly, and we're in that market. But those are just pockets, and that is just one service. So I think that is the primary constraint. Now obviously there's technology advances that still need to happen, but just as you saw with solar, if you create the market for it, the technology and the innovation will follow, absolutely.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. You had your hand up. Make it a good one.
Thank you. Well, I apologize for how tangential my policy question is, but it's policy, but it's around employment. And you guys, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this, because I work on the issue of recidivism from prisons and reentry and getting people jobs. And so, you touched on veterans, and we have a lot of formerly incarcerated veterans who are also looking for jobs. Do you guys hire people with criminal backgrounds on a case-by-case basis? About 25% of the population has a record at this point, which is astounding to me. But do you hire on a case-by-case basis?
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question. So do we basically hire people that have been incarcerated, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the short answer is yes, we do, but it is case by case, and it just depends on, you know, what they got in trouble for and if they're going to become our next CFO or not. So I can't give you any specifics, but we do look at them, and there are jobs, very entry-level jobs that we would consider and so forth, like reading meters or going out in the field and putting in, you know, construction lines and overhead and just different things like that.
Anybody else? Great. All right, we definitely will have time for mingling, mixing some drinks after this, and you guys can ask some other questions, but I just want to say thank you to Jeff Ackerman with the governor's office.